Our scripture reading is from Mark 12:38 to 44, New Living Translation. Jesus also taught, "Beware of these teachers of religious law, for they like to parade around in flowing robes and receive respectful greetings as they walk in the marketplaces, and how they love the seats of honor in the synagogues and the head table at banquets. Yet they shamelessly cheat widows out of their property, and then pretend to be pious by making long prayers in public. Because of this, they will be more severely punished." Jesus sat down near the collection box in the temple and watched as the crowds dropped in their money. Many rich people put in large amounts. Then a poor widow came and dropped in 2 small coins. Jesus called his disciples to him and said, "I tell you the truth. This poor widow has given more than all the others who are making contributions, for they gave a tiny part of their surplus. But she, poor as she is, has given everything she had to live on."
Well, we're getting close. Since January, maybe nobody noticed, but I worked hard at getting the name Jesus in the title of every sermon. Did you notice, anybody? Donna, did you notice? Good. And that means that we were looking at a series, and then when a pastor talks about a series, that means he can plan ahead, and everybody can be reading ahead and that kind of thing. And so the people who know how to get on the internet and get onto our pages there that give the list of sermons, you would know what we've been doing, and you know that we're almost done this part. Not done with Jesus, because we are a Christian church, and Christian means Christ one, and that's Jesus, and so nothing's ending, except we're getting too close to finishing this part where I have Jesus in the title of every sermon. And the fact that today it says Jesus Economics, you might remember another January, like last year, for this whole period of January to Easter and a little bit after, that was the name of the series, God's Economics. And we dealt with a lot of different ways of thinking about economic things, and we tried not to use that word because, well, quite frankly, you get sleepy when we hear the word economics, unless you're one of these people that actually get the magazine and check your trading online and all that kind of stuff. But we've been getting to know Jesus, and the way I said it at the beginning was we need to get to know Jesus for a change. And I explained to you how every time I say that, something clicks in my mind in terms of the double idea here, that if we don't get to know Jesus, nothing's going to change. And the other idea is that we all followers of Jesus, and yet we don't know Jesus very well, so it'll be a change when we get to know this Jesus in a new way. So that's what went through my mind every time I worked on these sermons and looked at these wonderful stories of Jesus. And sometimes I picked on some of the disciples more than others, and we tried to look at Jesus instead of a flat Bible way, but a realistic way. And I hope that you found that as you peeled away a little bit of the Bible storyness of these stories of Jesus, that you were challenged to think of Jesus in fresh ways, that he's alive and cares about us, and he lived on this earth. Not that he needed to live on this earth in order to think like us, because he knows us better. He's the creator. But we get to relate to the stories of Jesus knowing that he felt the things that we feel. The fear. The pain. The broken relationships. And he often, maybe not felt them personally, I don't know how that worked, but he certainly knew the pain of others. And this morning in this little story, and it's the setting for our story isn't given very clearly in the scripture itself, but it's after the triumphal entry into Jerusalem. It's after the tables have been turned upside down, And it's in a continuing conversation with the people who were upset because the tables were turned upside down. And you know that conversation had some heat to it. And some people really loved the way that Jesus was handling the people who were criticizing Jesus and who were the church leaders and bullied people. So, verse 37, do you have it there, Larry? You want to read it to me? I think it's the one before we read it. What's it say? Oh, I never planned this for him. He's going to be mad at me.
David himself called him Lord.
No, keep going, the next one.
38?
Yeah.
Okay. And as he taught, Jesus said.
No, there's one verse before that. At the end of that verse, 37.
The large crowd listened to him with delight.
Do you hear that? There was a whole bunch of people listening to Jesus with delight. You want to know that there was a smaller crowd that wasn't listening to him with delight because he was picking on them. And that's the kind of the context that we have for this story today. So, we're looking at a story of Jesus that needs to be dealt with in such a way that we're willing to hear it and then ask the question, how do I need to change? This is where I have a whole list of change jokes and Baptist jokes that come to mind. I'm not going to tell any of them because you'll know them all. It doesn't go well, Baptist and change, or seniors and change, or anybody and change. You think that it's a problem that you have as an older person, that you just don't like change, it upsets you? Try getting a teenager to change once they've decided on what they're wearing for the day. Change is hard for everybody, but we need to be thinking about that as we look at this story this morning. How are we to be changed? And it has to do with our view of money. It has to do with our view of stuff. As Jesus got the disciples and the people around him prepared for a big change, in a few days he would be crucified and die and then rise again. And the kingdom would begin in a whole new way. So this story is about, once again, preparing us for a change of who is the boss, a change of the kingdom, our view of who runs our life. Now, many of us, I'm probably looking around, I'm thinking most of us have at one point or another said to our Heavenly Father, I'm ready for the change. Create in me a new spirit. Live in me. Let me be born again spiritually. We've done that. But we know that we're not there yet. And we slip back so quickly. Anyway, Jesus had a lot of lessons to teach the disciples. And we've gone through lots and lots of them. And most of them, and for me, this is really helpful because I like simple. You might not believe that because the pastor always complicates things. You know, he tells a story and he gets it complicated. But this is really simple about what the disciples had to learn basically from Jesus. That the kingdom of heaven is about other people. It's not about me. And if I want to understand what Jesus was teaching, just remember that Jesus taught that you need to change from having everything about yourself. You need to think of others first. And that's a big change. And thank you, Ray, for your confession this morning. It was timely because, it says right in there, the guy gets up there, prays really long, and it's all about himself. What if Ray hadn't confessed? Do you think we would have caught on? No, we wouldn't. But Jesus pointed out pretty clearly that the church leaders, there were some of them that didn't have a right heart. They had religious duties to do, churchy things, God things, and yet they hadn't changed their hearts, or they had grown, they're tricked by Satan, however you want to say it, but it had turned it all the way around. Instead of being about God, it became about them. And Jesus had strong words for them. He warned about living your life in such a way to make a good impression about you. Beware of these teachers of the religious law, for they parade around in flowing robes and receive respectful greetings as they walk in the marketplaces. Some of the other versions use the word strut. And maybe that parade around is strong, but strutting around is even stronger. That these people were saying, now, it would be nice if they had some Jesus stickers on the back, and they were saying, look at the Jesus stickers, Jesus is lovely. But they didn't. They were saying, I'm lovely, I'm important. And if you think I'm exaggerating about the Jesus stickers thing, they were wearing robes that nobody made a mistake about who they were. They were religious people, and they were making impressions for them, not for God. They appeared godly, but it seemed that they had no love for God. But they did love the praise that people said, wow, look at that guy. Isn't that a nice robe as it flows, as he struts? You know? And sometimes they probably liked their prayers too. But we need, in order to be changed people, we need to understand that we are not to be taking our spirituality, our relationship with God, and wearing it like a badge that brings honor to us and not to God. You say, well, Pastor, you don't worry about that. None of us are like that. We're pretty shy. We don't do that kind of stuff. And maybe you don't, and that's good. So I can move on to the next point. I guess the reality is, though, in order to check up on that, instead of just me looking at you and you're all smiling and saying, no, I don't do that, we need to all check for ourselves. And the way we could check for ourselves is, what are we like when nobody's looking? What's our relationship with God like when nobody's looking? Are we the kind of followers of Jesus that kind of just do those actions and think those things when we're at church or we see church people looking at us? That would be the important part. Because what Jesus points out here is that this is dangerous stuff. It's all right for us to say, okay, I want to be more like Jesus, I want to be a follower of Jesus, and I want to be good at it, so I know I'm not supposed to point everything at me. I got it. What's the big deal? I can do that. The big deal is, and Jesus points out clearly in these people's actions, it started with strutting around saying, look at me. And then it gets criminal. You fall into all kinds of traps. The person who struts around saying, look at me, is going to trip up. And the way they're going to trip up, Jesus accuses them quite clearly. They love to sit in the honor seats at the synagogue. That means they're pushy. They want rush to the front. Their actions or their idea, the mentality that they're important, turns into actions. And it affects other people. It affects their relationships. And that can happen to us. When we think that we're more important than someone else, then we don't even care what they think, let alone where they are or what they're doing. But it even gets worse. They shamelessly cheat widows out of their property. Whoa! I don't know where that came from, because the next one is kind of churchy. They're pious in making their long prayers in public. And good thing Ray didn't go on a long time, because then I would have mentioned that in my sermon, eh? Good thing you kept it short this week. But the prayer thing, and praying in public and the piousness and that kind of thing, that fits, okay? We can say, okay, religious leaders shouldn't do that. But Jesus mentioned cheating widows out of their property. Now, I was going okay with just kind of forgiving those old guys that strutting around and say, because I'm a preacher's kid. I've seen Lots of old religious people. And you learn to let it go, eh? You can't be mad at everybody all the time. And that's what we do here. We live in grace. We look around and we see so-and-so doing what they always have done, and it's kind of obnoxious, but you let it go. We forgive one another. Because they might act a little pious, but they don't mean it. That's the way they are. You can let it go. But this other thing, Jesus publicly, remember, there was a crowds really liking what he was saying, and there was the other people that were ready to get mad and tell everybody to crucify him, and that's what they did in a few days. That's who it was pointed at. And Jesus said to all these people, be careful of those people. Don't follow them. Follow God. Because when you start following them or following the things in your heart, and when it's all about you, you don't even care about widows. Now, not caring is one thing. Stealing from them, cheating them of their own property. I mean, I don't know all the details of what that was going on here, but we get the hints of it at different times that in religious practices that they could do that, and because they had power over people. They cheated the poor out of everything they had, and they were not above taking advantage of the rich either. Basically, for us this morning, in order for us to grab onto something, I'm not even sure that any of you have an opportunity to cheat a widow, so I don't know where to go with that, other than in the kingdom of our God, the kingdom that are a part of, there's no place for users of people. No place. And we can maybe grasp hold of this idea a little bit more and ask the Lord to make sure that when we're dealing with people that we don't just use them. We just don't find out, we go visit somebody because, well, never mind, I won't try to give you ideas on that. Just don't be a user of people. And then the next part of the story is intriguing too. Because Jesus knew that he had very little time. Remember, he had been telling the disciples all along that he was coming, they were going down to Jerusalem, and he told the disciples what was going to happen. Peter said, don't do that, Lord, you can't do that. And Jesus said, get behind me, Satan. And there's all kinds of stories that we've had on the road to Jerusalem. He gets to Jerusalem, they Hosanna him into the town, and then he goes to the temple and he turns tables over and preaches that the temple of God is more holy than this, and they're interacting in the public square, outside the synagogue. I picture a Jesus really pumped up, on an adrenaline high. He just got every story, coming across with calling these guys the hypocrites and whitewashed sepulchres. Try that. It's hard to say. But he called them cleaned up graves. And just the beautiful, and the parading around, the strutting around, the beautiful language of describing the bad guys. And then this next part of the story, he sits down. Whoa, he wasn't all pumped up. He wasn't just on an adrenaline thing, getting ready. No, he sat down. And he must have had the disciples sit down with him and said, hey guys, take a break. Can you just feel it? The tension of back and forth with all the religious leaders and everybody listening on every word, and he could just say the wrong thing and they could get rushed and thrown in jail. Well, there's a lot of tension in these verses. But then it says that Jesus sat down. Can you just feel it? He says, disciples, hey guys, take a break. Let's sit over here. So they're all sitting there. People watching. You ever do that at airports? You just take a break and you know that you got lots of time. You don't have to look at your agenda or anything else. You just take a break and watch people. That's what Jesus does here. And I don't think the story moves as quickly as it maybe needs to in our scripture. I think there was a little bit of a breather. Jesus sat down. And it happened to be in the alleyway where people were coming into church, into the synagogue, the next part of the synagogue, and they had their boxes where they put the offering in. I don't know what happened in our church history that we changed that, because handing around, maybe people didn't want to get up. Our modern people want the plate passed around to them. You know, in some churches I've been, they actually have, maybe you've been there too, they have a big long stick with a little bag and they pass it down, and so you don't even have to pass the plate. Well, we could do that. We've got a center there. We could make a big box and everybody could put their money in there, and that would save time in the service for more announcements or something, you know. Just saying. But that was their custom, for people to give their offering that way. And Jesus said, hey, watch this. But he didn't draw their attention to it until an older lady. And I don't know how he knew she was a widow, but that's what the Bible describes. She was a widow, a poor widow. And she came through, and I'm amazed that our view of this story is so detailed. Okay? I grew up when cameras and movies and stuff were, by the time I got to grade 12, there was an English course dedicated only to movies. Can you imagine? And making movies. So I had to watch all those black and white movies and Charlie Chaplin and all that kind of stuff as part of my schoolwork. But through the movies, I'm not saying I'm very good at it, but oftentimes I picture events and stories the way a camera would see it in making a movie. So when I think of what we're told here by Mark, the details, that this widow, from her hand, that she would have 2 small coins, and it went over the box. She might even stuck her hand in the box a little bit and let go. But Mark says there was 2 of them. There was 2 little coins. And he also told us that the rich people put in lots of money. Well, that wouldn't be so hard, because you hear clank, 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 or the beautiful sound of as the big check went down, right? You know, they didn't have checks. But they could have been paper money, but mostly coins, and they put lots in. But the point is that it's Jesus that's watching, not us. And so he was able to say to his disciples, ready? Are you ready? It's going to be another lesson. This is another teaching moment. Get ready. And so he told them. He called his disciples to him. He says, I tell you the truth. This poor widow has given more than all the others who are making contributions. Remember the personality of some of these disciples. I'm not going to pick on any particular one, but Peter and James and John, they were in our story just a few weeks ago, and they really had missed the point about understanding what the kingdom was, and Peter had misunderstood lots about Jesus being the Messiah and all these kinds of things. But their boss, their Jesus, said, I tell you the truth, 2 coins are more than a big bunch of money. Now, we read that, and we're reading the Bible. We don't even care. We know that if Jesus said it, it's true. But he said, tell you the truth, this little bit of money is more than the big bit of money. You go, okay, he's not a mathematician. Don't make him the treasurer of the group. He obviously, a little bit of money isn't as much as a big bit of money. And yet, Jesus said, I'm telling you the truth. So, don't fall asleep at this part, because it doesn't make any sense until Jesus explains it. And we need to hear this explanation, because it has to do with our hearts. And he says that this widow gave from her heart. Remember, he had described the strutting, the parading around of the guys that do it only for themselves. Well, they also put money in only for themselves. And he said, here's an example of how we're supposed to do it. And it is money here, but we know from all, we're really wise about this, we really don't need to just talk about money. I don't think that Jesus is asking us here to give all that we have. But he's not, he is asking us to consider how we give. that there's a difference between a generous heart and a deceitful heart. And the Lord notices every action from a sincere heart. In Hebrews 13, it says, with such sacrifices God is pleased. So when we're thinking about how we give and how we interact with our money and our stuff and our relationship with God, we understand that our hearts need to be changed. It's a gift from God. It's what has to have happen in us. Jesus points out and says that this lady, this poor widow, gave everything she had. I wonder, when we consider, and the way we talk about giving, when we consider a certain percentage of our income, and when we give that's a great accomplishment. I'm afraid that kind of action resembles giving out of our abundance instead of out of our poverty or our lack of things. But the point is that Jesus makes it clear, in a moment when the minds of the disciples and all the people around them are in the game of saying, Jesus is winning, he's so smart, and he's beating these guys up who are church leaders and stuff. In the midst of all this, Jesus says, stop. Sit down. Consider your heart. Consider your attitude towards one another and towards God. He says, when you do that, you will consider increasing your giving. Maybe not of money. It includes money, your time, the things that God has given you. And you'll give that and you'll increase it to a point that the widow did, a point beyond convenience or safety. Maybe that's just too far. I'm not going to take it back, but I'm just saying, pay attention here. Is the story of the widow telling us that we need to examine how we interact with our stuff and with one another, and how we hang on to our stuff, and when we hang on to more stuff and more, that we're not trusting God? The widow had made a decision to go to the synagogue, and for her, that was a spiritual experience, and she had been taught that when you interact with God, you do it with a sincere heart. What a model she was. She decided that she knew that she was to give, and so she took what she had and took it and gave it. One more point here, and I want to read a few verses from 2 Corinthians at this time. Paul writes, he says, now, friends, I want to report on a surprising and generous ways in which God is working in the churches in Macedonian province. Remember, he was a missionary all over the place, so he knew about these things. But it's surprising and generous, okay? And he reports that fierce troubles came down on the people of these churches. We can't even imagine what that would be. Pushing them to the very limit. The trial exposed their true colors. Uh-oh. The trials exposed their true colors. But wait, they were incredibly happy. You didn't expect that coming, did you? They were incredibly happy, though desperately poor. The pressure triggered something totally unexpected, an outpouring of pure and generous gifts. See why Paul was excited to write some of these things. I was there, and I saw for myself. They gave offerings of whatever they could, far more than they could afford, pleading for the privilege of helping out in the relief of poor Christians. Pleading for the privilege of giving. This was totally spontaneous, entirely their own idea, and caught us completely off guard. What explains it was that they had first given themselves unreservedly to God and to us. The other giving simply flowed out of the purposes of God working in their lives. Surprised by that? We're talking about motivation in our own hearts. And here, Paul gives us an example of how it happens. And we've lived the example. There's been times in each one of your lives when you understand that principle, that you just ache for an opportunity to be a blessing to somebody. For an opportunity not to have somebody look at you, but an opportunity for you to be used by God in somebody else's life. And that only happens when you first give yourself to the Lord. And that's what we celebrate this morning. Those who surrender their lives to the Lord are in a position to give beyond their ability. If you have no idea what I'm talking about in terms of giving beyond your ability, maybe you need to ask yourselves if you're giving your heart to the Lord, if you're giving yourself to the Lord. It's fun how you can do equations backwards too. Believers' wealth and possessions are not theirs to keep. Remember that we're just managers. The beautiful truth of knowing Jesus for now and for eternity is to let him change us daily. Folks, as we come to the communion table this morning, we're going to do that right now. Let the Lord speak to you about your generous heart, about how, Paul used the word unreservedly. It's a hard word to say. Do you have reservations about trusting God? Are you not sure that he can look after you? Because if you live that way, then the Lord can't work in you and use you for helping others. We need to lay it all out there. And that's what the opportunity, I feel strongly that when we gather around the table and we take the elements and we have quiet time and we listen to God speak to us. Let him do that now. Come forward, you folks, and we get prepared to share together around the table.